A charred fragment of animal skin sits under climate-controlled glass in the shrine of the book in Jerusalem. It is a piece of a manuscript that describes the day the sky opened and something came down. Church leaders removed the book it belongs to from Scripture at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE, banned it, called it dangerous. For over 16 centuries, it stayed that way. Then, in 1947, 11 separate copies of that same book surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, more copies than most books that made it into the Bible. And the passage on that fragment does not read like a myth. The Book of Enoch names them, 200 of them. It gives their leaders names one by one. It records the exact mountain where they landed, the oath they swore before they came down, and the specific knowledge they handed to humanity that the text says corrupted the entire species. Not a myth, not a metaphor. He names the beings. He names their teacher. He records what each one taught. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text says, what archaeologists have dug out of a hillside in southern Turkey, and why access to the oldest manuscripts of this book has been restricted since 1974. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The account isn't vague. It sits in the opening chapters of the Book of the Watchers, Enoch 6 through 8, the oldest layer of the entire book. Fragment 4, Q201, held in Jerusalem, preserves this exact section in Aramaic, and it has been carbon dated older than any surviving New Testament manuscript. The GEI's manuscript tradition in Ethiopia carries the complete version. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford edition remains a standard scholarly reference, worked from those Ethiopian manuscripts because they preserve what the fragments only hint at. And what they preserve does not behave like apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic writing deals in symbols, beasts with many horns, numbers that stand for kingdoms. This does something else. It gives a head count. It gives coordinates. It gives a list of names and job titles. The level of detail is wrong for ancient literature. This reads like a personnel file, and this is where it gets disturbing. Chapter 6 opens with the descent. The text says, "The sons of heaven, the watchers, saw the daughters of men and desired them. 200 of them. Their leader, the text names as Semjaza. And before they came down, they did something no myth bothers to include. They stopped. They swore an oath, chapters 6 to 4 records, that Semjaza feared they would abandon the plan and leave him to pay the penalty alone. So they bound themselves together by mutual curse before descending." This is not the behavior of symbolic beings. This is the behavior of a crew that knows it is committing a crime and wants everyone equally guilty so no one can turn back. The text even records where they landed. Chapter 6 to 6 says they descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. Most readers pass over that name. Mount Hermon is real. It sits on the border of Syria and Lebanon, 2,814 meters high, the tallest peak in the entire Levant. And the text says the mountain got its name from this event. The Hebrew root cherem means a binding oath, a thing devoted, a curse. Hermon, the place of the oath. Enoch isn't giving us a spiritual metaphor. He is giving us a named, mappable location and telling us why it is called what it is called. He describes the door. He records the landing site. He names the men who came through. What follows breaks into 3 parts: the oath, the offspring, and the knowledge. And it is the third part that the church could not tolerate. The text begins with what the 200 did after they descended. Chapter 7 says, "Each of them took a wife, and they went into them, and the women conceived. But what came out was not human." Chapter 7 to 2 describes the offspring as giants. The GES word is rendered as great ones, beings of enormous size. And the text says they consumed everything the humans could produce until there was nothing left, and then they turned on the humans themselves. The mainstream reading calls this folklore, a way of explaining ancient legends of giants. But the text doesn't read it as legend. It reads it as a census of a population that got out of control. It gives their appetite, it gives their behavior, it gives the sequence. First the crops, then the livestock, then the people. This is not how you write a myth. This is how you write an incident report. But the text doesn't stop there. What follows in chapter 8 is stranger still, because the real corruption, according to Enoch, was not the giants. It was the curriculum. Chapter 8-1 names a specific watcher, Azazel, and records exactly what he taught. He taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. He revealed to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Read that again. The text is describing the sudden arrival of metallurgy and weapons manufacturing, attributed not to slow human discovery, but to a single named source who handed it over deliberately. And the text keeps going. Azazel taught them bracelets and ornaments, antimony for the eyes, the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and coloring dyes, metalworking, cosmetics, pigments, the technologies of a civilization, delivered as a package. He had no way to know how strange that list would look. No ancient writer inventing a morality tale reaches for antimony and eyelid pigment and breastplate forging in the same breath. Yet the text lists them together, as if reciting from a manifest. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. Chapter 8 doesn't stop at Azazel. It assigns each remaining leader a specialty, like a faculty roster. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, the text says. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. And then Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamziel taught the signs of the sun. And Sariel taught the course of the moon. Look at what that list actually is. Astronomy, meteorology, the reading of the sky, the earth, the sun, and the moon, each assigned to a different named instructor. The text is describing the transfer of observational science, star charts, seasonal prediction, calendar keeping, the knowledge base of every early astronomical culture on Earth, cataloged here as forbidden instruction handed down by named beings who came from above. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English editions render chapter 8 as a story of sin, of angels teaching humans to do wrong, and they leave it there. But the Ge'ez tradition frames the verbs differently. The word rendered as taught is not the soft word for sharing wisdom. It carries the sense of revealed, disclosed, handed over what was hidden. These were not lessons the watchers were permitted to give. The text presents them as classified information, secrets that belonged above, deliberately smuggled below, and there is a clause most Western editions compress. After the list of what each one taught, chapter 8 records that as men perished, they cried out, and their cry went up to heaven. The teaching and the dying are placed in the same sentence. The knowledge did not enrich humanity. In the text's account, it consumed it. The world changed, the GEAS says, and the word for changed carries the sense of corrupted beyond repair. The text moves on. But the implication sits there. The thing that doomed humanity was not the giants. It was the download. What modern readers don't realize is how closely this matches something archaeologists pulled out of the ground in southern Turkey. In the 1990s, a team led by the German Archaeological Institute began excavating a site called Göbekli Tepe. What they found rewrote the timeline of civilization. Massive carved stone pillars, some over 5 meters tall, arranged in deliberate circles, covered in reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest layers around 9,600 BCE. That is roughly 11,500 years old. Older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years. Older than the pyramids by 7,000. Older than writing, older than the wheel, older than farming as we understood it. Built by people who were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers with no capacity for monumental architecture. And here is the detail that matters. Göbekli Tepe sits in the foothills of the same mountain range that runs up toward Mount Hermon. The region the Book of Enoch names as the landing site is the same region where advanced knowledge appears in the archaeological record thousands of years before it should. Sophisticated stonework, astronomical alignments, organized labor on a scale that requires planning and mathematics, appearing suddenly, fully formed, with no developmental trail behind it. Archaeologists still debate how people with no cities and no agriculture built it. The text describes knowledge arriving from outside all at once in the mountains of the Near East. The archaeology found advanced knowledge arriving from nowhere all at once in the mountains of the Near East. The parallel is not metaphorical. It is structural. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. Church leaders removed Enoch from the canon, and in the centuries around it, treated its contents as dangerous. The specific problem with chapters 6 through 8 was never only theological. It was that the text made claims you could go and check. It named a real mountain. It described a real category of technology appearing in human history. It attributed civilization itself to an external source. That is a testable frame, and testable claims are dangerous in a way that pure allegory is not. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate, treated the book as unreliable and outside scripture. Augustine, in the City of God around 410 CE, argued its accounts of the Watchers and their giant offspring were not to be trusted and warned readers away from it. Neither man explained why a text this old carried a precise inventory of early technology. They dismissed the book, they did not answer it. The Ethiopian church, operating independently of Rome, kept Enoch in its canon and preserved the complete text when every Western copy vanished. For over 1,000 years, the only surviving full manuscripts sat in Ethiopia, and Europe assumed the book was lost. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce carried 3 Keys manuscripts out of Ethiopia to Europe in 1773. The chapters on the Watchers and their forbidden teaching drew immediate controversy. 19th century scholars who examined the descent account called it primitive, embarrassing, a corruption of Genesis. R.H. Charles, whose 196 translation most people still quote, appended footnotes explaining away the strangest passages, rather than confronting them. The pattern held for 2 centuries. Dismiss the detail, never account for it. Now, here's where it gets active. Access to the oldest GES manuscripts held in Ethiopian church collections was restricted after 1974, when the revolution that overthrew the emperor classified church archives as protected national property. Since then, direct scholarly examination of the primary manuscripts has been limited, and researchers have complained for decades that certain readings are known only through secondary references because the originals cannot be inspected. Requests to examine specific manuscript traditions have gone unanswered. The most complete surviving witnesses to the oldest account of the Watchers sit behind stone walls and government restriction, and the people who most want to read them cannot get in. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying 200 physical beings landed on a mountain in Lebanon and personally handed blueprints to Stone Age humans. The Book of Enoch is not an engineering manual, but what the text describes, when you read it carefully, matches something the record keeps confirming. Technology and astronomical knowledge appearing suddenly in the ancient Near East, far earlier than the standard timeline allows. A named mountain that turns out to be real, a leap in human capability that archaeologists still cannot explain, and a text older than the Roman Empire that attributes all of it to an outside source. He had no excavation reports, no carbon dating, no way to know that the oldest monumental site on Earth would one day be dug out of the exact region his text points to. And yet, the account sits there, in Ge'ez and in Aramaic, in fragments found at Qumran, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the Book of Enoch names a real mountain as the point of contact, if it records the sudden arrival of metallurgy, weapons, cosmetics, and astronomy as a single transfer of knowledge, if the oldest advanced construction humanity has ever found sits in that same region thousands of years before it should exist, and if a text written before the Roman Empire describes all of it in plain, itemized language, then the text is not mythology, it is documentation. Enoch wrote it down with the same flat tone a clerk uses recording an inventory. 200 came down. Here are their names. Here is what each one taught. Here is what it did to us. The account he leaves is either a symbol we have misread for 2 millennia, or it is exactly what he says it is. A record of the day something came down and changed the species. The fragment sits under glass in Jerusalem. The complete manuscripts remain in Ethiopia, behind church walls and government restriction. The carved pillars stand exposed on a hillside in southern Turkey, thousands of years older than they have any right to be. And in a book the church removed from the Bible 16 centuries ago, a man named Enoch writes down the names of 200 beings who came from the sky, and the exact knowledge they gave us. The mountain is still there. The names are still on the page, and whatever came down, the knowledge it left behind is still with us, still running the world exactly the way Enoch said it would. If this is the kind of history that was kept from you, the next investigation is already waiting on screen.